The rusted iron gates of Blackwood Asylum loomed before them, a jagged silhouette against the blood-orange sunset. A chill wind whipped down the overgrown path, rattling the skeletal branches of the surrounding trees and tugging at the worn backpacks of the four friends. There was Alex, the self-proclaimed leader, his bravado barely masking a simmering nervousness. Beside him stood Maya, ever the skeptic, rolling her eyes at Alex's theatrics but secretly intrigued. Rounding out the group were Noah, the resident history buff, his eyes gleaming with a morbid fascination, and Emily, the quiet observer, clutching her camera a little tighter. Blackwood Asylum had been a notorious institution in its time, a place where the mentally ill were warehoused rather than treated. Rumors of neglect, abuse, and even death shrouded the abandoned complex like a ghostly fog. Naturally, this morbid history was exactly what drew Alex and his friends here, their thirst for a good scare outweighing any lingering reservations. As dusk settled, casting long shadows across the uneven ground, they breached the rusted gates, the screech echoing through the desolate courtyard. The facade of the asylum was a grotesque tapestry of peeling paint, shattered windows, and crumbling brick. Ivy, like sinister veins, snaked its way up the walls, reclaiming the building for nature. Noah, referencing a faded map he downloaded, pointed towards a boarded-up double door. The admission office, supposedly the most haunted part of the building. A thrill of apprehension coursed through the group. With a collective heave, they pried open the rotting wood, the sound like nails scraping on a chalkboard. A musty odor, a blend of dust and decay, assaulted their nostrils as they stepped into the darkness. A single flashlight beam illuminated chipped floorboards and cobwebbed corners. Faded medical charts hung like ghostly apparitions on the walls, their sterile script a stark contrast to the macabre atmosphere. A sudden groan echoed from the hallway, long and drawn out, sending shivers down their spines. Alex, trying to sound brave, cleared his throat. Just the wind settling, he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. They ventured deeper into the asylum, each room a portal into a forgotten past. Straight-jacketed figures seemed to materialize in the flickering light, only to vanish with a blink. Whispers, faint and indistinguishable, swirled around them, seemingly emanating from the very walls. In an abandoned ward, they found a row of empty beds, their metal frames groaning like tortured souls. A child's rocking horse sat forgotten in a corner, its paint chipped, its vacant eyes staring into oblivion. Maya, her initial skepticism waning, felt a growing sense of unease. The oppressive atmosphere, the constant unseen eyes, it was all getting to her. Emily, on the other hand, seemed strangely captivated, her camera clicking incessantly, capturing the asylum's decaying beauty. As they reached the end of a particularly long corridor, the air grew frigid. A guttural shriek tore through the silence, making them jump. Noah shone his flashlight into a darkened doorway, revealing a padded cell, the walls scrawled with cryptic symbols and desperate pleas for help. A cold hand clamped down on Alex's shoulder. He spun around, heart pounding, only to find Maya's face inches from his, her eyes wide with terror. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. "Hear what?" he asked, trying to sound calm despite the racing pulse in his neck. "A voice," she replied. "It whispered my name." A wave of panic surged through the group. The whispers seemed to intensify, swirling around them like a malevolent fog. They ran, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls, the asylum seemingly playing a cruel game of cat and mouse. They stumbled into a deserted operating room. Surgical tools lay scattered on a dusty table, glinting like malevolent teeth in the faint light. Suddenly, the old-fashioned overhead lamp flickered to life, bathing the room in a ghastly white glow. On a gurney in the center of the room lay a translucent figure, its features contorted in an eternal scream. A collective gasp escaped their lips. Noah, his voice tight with fear, recognized the figure from an old asylum photograph. "It's Dr. Albright," he stammered, "the head doctor they said experimented on his patients." The spectral figure turned its head towards them, its hollow eyes boring into their souls. Another harrowing scream filled the room, followed by a cold, disembodied voice. "Get out!" it boomed, echoing through the asylum. Panicked, they scrambled towards the exit, pushing past the rusty doors that seemed to resist their frantic efforts. But the doors wouldn't budge. Claustrophobia threatened to consume them as they slammed against the unyielding wood, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Suddenly, Emily, usually quiet and reserved, spoke up. "There has to be another way out." She pointed towards a curtained-off alcove in the corner of the room. Hope flickered in their eyes. With a renewed burst of adrenaline, Alex yanked the dusty curtain aside, revealing a narrow, rickety staircase leading down into the darkness. A stale, fetid air emanated from the opening, sending shivers down their spines. "It's our only option," Noah said, his voice trembling slightly. "Let's go." One by one, they descended the creaking steps, the darkness swallowing them whole. The air grew thicker with each step, the musty smell punctuated by a metallic tang that turned their stomachs. The silence was broken only by the rasp of their breath and the rhythmic pounding of their hearts. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the bottom of the staircase, emerging into a dimly lit tunnel. Water dripped from unseen cracks in the ceiling, echoing in the oppressive silence. The tunnel walls were lined with rusted pipes and flaking paint, the air thick with the scent of mildew and decay. Maya, on the verge of tears, clung to Alex's arm. "Where are we going?" she whimpered. "I don't know," Alex admitted, his voice laced with fear. "But we can't stay in the operating room." As they ventured deeper into the tunnel, the whispers they'd heard earlier grew louder, more distinct. They were no longer faint murmurs, but tormented voices filled with anguish and despair. The whispers seemed to come from all around them, swirling in their heads, making it impossible to discern any words. Suddenly, a flickering light appeared ahead. They quickened their pace, hope battling against the ever-present fear. As they rounded a corner, they stumbled upon a large chamber illuminated by a single flickering lantern. The air hung heavy with an unsettling stillness, broken only by the dripping water and the frantic beating of their hearts. In the center of the chamber stood a massive iron cage, its rusted bars casting grotesque shadows on the surrounding walls. Within the cage, huddled together, were several spectral figures, their faces contorted in expressions of despair and terror. A horrifying realization dawned on them. These were the former patients of Blackwood Asylum, trapped in an eternal nightmare. As their eyes met the terrified gazes of the ghostly figures, a wave of overwhelming compassion washed over them. "Who are you?" a voice rasped from within the cage. It was an old woman, her translucent form barely visible in the dim light. Gathering his courage, Noah stepped forward. We're just explorers," he stammered. "We didn't mean to disturb you. This place is cursed," the woman rasped, her voice filled with sorrow. "There is no escape. There has to be a way out," Emily insisted, her voice stronger than they'd ever heard it before. "We won't leave you here." A flicker of hope seemed to ignite in the spectral eyes of the trapped figures. The woman looked at Emily with a mix of gratitude and doubt. "Can you help us?" she asked. Emily, emboldened by a newfound determination, began scrutinizing the iron cage, searching for any sign of weakness. She noticed a series of intricate symbols etched onto the bars, their meaning lost to time. Noah, remembering his research on the asylum, chimed in. "Those symbols," he exclaimed, "they're ancient symbols of protection. Maybe if we can decipher them." A wave of excitement rippled through the group. Hope, a fragile flame that had flickered precariously within him, now burned a little brighter. Alex, ever the pragmatist, tempered their enthusiasm. "Even if we figure out the symbols," he cautioned, "how do we know they'll actually do anything?" Emily, however, wouldn't be deterred. Her gaze remained fixed on the intricate markings. "There's only one way to find out," she declared, her voice imbued with a newfound resolve. Noah, fueled by Emily's determination, pulled out his phone and frantically searched for information on ancient symbols. Maya, fear still clinging to her, found a newfound purpose in rummaging through their backpacks, gathering any object that might be useful. A broken pen, a discarded lighter, even a hair clip. The atmosphere in the chamber crackled with a desperate energy. Time seemed to stretch and contract as Emily meticulously documented the symbols, Noah frantically researched their meaning, and Maya constructed makeshift tools from their meager supplies. Meanwhile, the spectral figures within the cage observed them with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Their ghostly forms seemed to shimmer a little brighter, fueled by the flicker of potential liberation. Suddenly, Noah let out a triumphant cry. "I found it!" he exclaimed, his voice echoing in the cavernous chamber. "These symbols are part of an ancient ritual of appeasement. They're meant to calm restless spirits and restore balance." Hope surged through the group. But understanding the ritual was one thing, performing it successfully was quite another. According to Noah's research, the ritual required specific offerings and incantations, neither of which they possessed. Despair threatened to engulf them once more. But then, Emily pointed at the cryptic symbols on the cage. "Look," she exclaimed, "these markings could be the incantation itself." A renewed wave of hope washed over them. Deciphering the inscription, however, proved to be a daunting task. The ancient language was fragmented, the symbols worn and ambiguous. Hours bled into what felt like an eternity as they meticulously analyzed the markings, comparing them to historical texts on their phones, their frustration mounting with each passing moment. Just as despair threatened to consume him again, Emily, her eyes wide with realization, pointed at a particular symbol. "This one," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "it's a symbol of sacrifice." A cold dread settled in their stomachs. The ritual, they understood, demanded an offering, something precious to them. The spectral figures within the cage seemed to sense their understanding, their expressions shifting from hope to a quiet acceptance. Without a word, Alex stepped forward. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a cherished memento, a silver locket containing a picture of his late grandmother. Tears welled up in his eyes as he held it aloft. "This was my grandma's," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The only thing I have left of her." The other three exchanged a look of understanding and respect. Alex's sacrifice meant something to all of them. It was a symbol of loss, but also of hope. The hope of offering peace to the trapped souls and finding their own way out of this nightmare. As Alex placed the locket against the inscribed bars of the cage, the air crackled with unseen energy. The symbols glowed faintly, pulsing with an ethereal light. The spectral figures within the cage reached out, their translucent forms shimmering with renewed intensity. Suddenly, the air filled with a cacophony of voices, whispers morphing into shouts, pleas for release echoing through the chamber. The ancient symbols on the cage erupted in a blinding light, momentarily engulfing the room in a white-hot glow. When the light subsided, they found themselves staring at the empty cage. The spectral figures were gone, leaving behind an unsettling silence. A sense of relief washed over them, mixed with a lingering sadness for the tormented souls they'd encountered. But their ordeal wasn't over. They still needed to find a way out of the dark labyrinthine tunnels beneath Blackwood Asylum. Fueled by a newfound sense of purpose, they pressed on, the flickering lantern casting long, distorted shadows as they ventured deeper into the unknown. The silence that followed the spectral figure's disappearance was heavy and oppressive. A wave of exhaustion washed over them, the adrenaline that had fueled their actions for so long finally fading. They stood there for a moment, catching their breath, the weight of their experience settling in. "We did it," Emily finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "We actually did it," Noah echoed, a sense of wonder replacing his earlier fear. Alex, however, remained somber, the locket now clutched tightly in his hand. He looked at the empty cage, a bittersweet feeling swirling within him. A part of him felt a sense of accomplishment, but another yearned for the chance to say goodbye to the trapped souls they'd freed. Maya, ever the pragmatist, broke the contemplative silence. "We need to get out of here," she stated, her voice firm. They all nodded in agreement. The initial thrill of their success had been replaced by a renewed urgency to escape the dank tunnels. Consulting the faded map they'd found earlier, they determined the location of an exit marked as an emergency fire escape. Hope flickered once more. The journey towards the escape route was arduous. The tunnels seemed to twist and turn endlessly, the air thick with humidity and the ever-present smell of decay. Their progress was hampered by fallen debris and narrow passages that forced him to crawl on their hands and knees. The flickering light from their phones barely penetrated the suffocating darkness, casting grotesque shadows that danced on the damp walls. As they ventured deeper, a sense of unease settled over them. The whispers, absent since the ritual, had returned, but this time they were different. These whispers held a malicious edge, filled with a chilling laughter and taunting voices that seemed to echo from every direction. Suddenly, the tunnel floor gave way beneath Noah's feet, sending him plummeting into a hidden pit. His scream filled the air, echoing through the darkness. Panic surged through the group. They rushed to the edge of the pit, their flashlights illuminating a deep chasm filled with jagged rocks and murky water. "Noah!" Maya cried out, her voice trembling. There was a muffled groan from below, followed by a weak cough. "I'm okay," Noah called back, his voice strained. "Just a twisted ankle, I think." Relief washed over them, but it was short-lived. A chilling voice, dripping with malevolent glee, echoed through the tunnels. "Lost, little travelers," it cackled. "These halls hold secrets, and those who trespass pay the price." Fear turned their blood to ice. The voice wasn't one of the whispers, it was distinct, embodied, and undeniably evil. They huddled together, their backs pressed against the tunnel wall, searching frantically for the source of the voice. A pair of glowing red eyes materialized from the darkness deeper in the tunnel. They pulsed with an unnatural light, growing closer with each passing moment. A monstrous entity, shrouded in shadows, began to take shape, its form shifting and contorting in a way that defied logic. Trapped, injured, and facing a terrifying entity, the friends braced themselves for the final confrontation in the heart of Blackwood Asylum. In the flickering lantern light, the monstrous entity loomed ever closer, its grotesque form a terrifying manifestation of the asylum's dark history. Fear threatened to consume them, but the memory of the spectral figures they'd freed sparked a flicker of defiance within them. "We can't let it win," Alex said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in his hands. He remembered the inscription on the cage, the symbol of sacrifice. Perhaps the key to defeating this entity lay not in brute force, but in offering something of value. He looked at Maya, Emily, and Noah, their faces etched with fear but also a glimmer of determination. With a silent nod, they understood. They each reached into their backpacks, pulling out the most cherished item they had brought. For Maya, a well-worn friendship bracelet. For Emily, a tattered childhood photograph, and for Noah, a dog-eared copy of his favorite book. Together, they stepped forward, holding their offerings aloft. "These represent who we are," Alex declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "They hold our memories, our connections to the world outside these walls." The entity recoiled slightly, as if surprised by their defiance. The red eyes flickered, a flicker of something akin to hunger replaced by a grudging respect. Then, in a voice that rumbled through the tunnels like an avalanche, it spoke. "You understand the value of memories," it boomed. "Perhaps you are worthy to leave this place." With a deafening roar, the entity dissipated, leaving behind an unsettling silence. Exhausted and shaken, they stumbled towards the opening of the pit, where Noah was gingerly climbing out. "We need to get out of here," Maya whispered, her voice hoarse. They used their remaining supplies to fashion a makeshift splint for Noah's ankle and, leaning on each other for support, made their way back through the labyrinthine tunnels. The journey back seemed shorter, fueled by a desperate need to escape. Finally, they reached the hidden passage they'd used to enter the cavern. Emerging back into the deserted corridor, they found the rusty door ajar, as if beckoning them out. They burst out of Blackwood Asylum just as the first rays of dawn painted the sky a pale orange. The sight of the rising sun, a symbol of hope and renewal, brought tears to their eyes. They had escaped the asylum, not unscathed, but forever changed. The experience had forged an unbreakable bond between them, a shared memory of terror and triumph. They had faced their fears, confronted darkness, and emerged, battered but unbroken. As they walked away from the crumbling asylum, the image of the spectral figures lingered in their minds, a silent reminder of the restless souls they'd helped find peace. And within the cavern, deep beneath Blackwood Asylum, the crystal clear pool shimmered, a silent guardian of forgotten memories.